Tonight's speaker is Greg Sumner. His talk will be Detroit in World War II, and without giving too long of an introduction, I'll state that Greg is the chair of history at the University of Detroit Mercy, where he's taught since 1993. He holds a doctorate in American history from Indiana University and has been awarded summer fellowships by the National Endowment for the Humanities, and twice has been a Fulbright scholar or senior lecturer at the University of
Roma Tre.
Thank you.
Roma Tre.
I knew you'd be able to pronounce it. Thank you.
Parlo un po' italiano.
His BA and MA degrees are also from in Indiana University, and his PhD, as I mentioned, is also from there in American history. Additionally, he possesses a Juris Doctor or law degree, of course, from University of Michigan, and describes himself as a recovering lawyer. He previously taught at Grand Valley State and Indiana University. He teaches American history, Vietnam War, World War II, Michigan history, the history of Detroit, and topics in the civil rights movement. His previous books include Dwight MacDonald and the Political Circles, subtitled The Challenge of Cosmopolitan Democracy, and Unstuck in Time, A Journey Through Kurt Vonnegut's life and work. As I say, he's a Fulbright scholar, and it's a great honor to have Dr. Sumner with us. I'll turn it over to you then. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you. That was too much. And I told him he could call me a recovering lawyer.
That's right.
I did it for a few minutes. I always feel like I've died and gone to heaven when I speak in front of a group like this, because my day job is talking to 20-year-olds in college and trying to get them interested in history, and they're very bright. They can run circles around me.
Yeah, with the computer.
But I have to tell you, and this is probably not a newsflash, most college students don't know much history. And they couldn't, some of them can't, what's December 7th, 1941? That's the one date they have to know, to pass my class. Some of them can't tell you who we were fighting in the Second World War. So, this is not a news flash. Most Americans are pretty historically illiterate. So I'm talking, we're a small group here. I'm preaching to the choir. And I wrote this book, Detroit in World War II, in part to try to make what happened here during the Second World War, when Detroit was the arsenal of democracy, make it accessible to young people and tell stories and get them interested, because they should know what their grandparents were doing and their great-grandparents, and they ought to have a lot of pride about it. Why don't young people know much history? I'll have a class of 35 earlier today. They were different than this group. And, they're on, okay, so out of 35, maybe 30 almost have I could tell them anything, and they would just write it down and give it back to me. But out of that group, maybe 5 or 6 will be interested in history, will want to talk to me about things, come up to me. And the reason is their parents took them to Civil War battlefields. They have somebody in their family who's in the military. This was fostered at home. And also some of them had a really great high school teacher or something like that. So why don't young people know much history? Why don't they know much about this war that happened 70 years ago? I think, I'm not here to say why. It's schools, it's parents who probably don't know much history. I'm taking a moment here to get on my soapbox.
Sure, please.
But where's my box? I have to also say, I think a big problem is this. Because they're on the thing all the way till I start talking. They're trying to do it while I'm talking, and I have to kind of police it. And then as soon as I'm done, they never say, well, let's talk about, did Roosevelt know about Pearl Harbor? It's quickly, boom, 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 they're back to that. So as good as digital stuff is, it does not encourage reflective
And their
thinking.
thumbs will be ruined by the time they're 50.
Their thumbs, they've already got
that's
arthritis. Right. So, I just wanted to say that. And so this is wonderful to be here. And I'm honored that Mike asked me to come. And this is possibly the coolest venue I've spoken in. I was at the Grosse Pointe War Memorial. I've given talks since the book came out in November at the Yankee Air Museum on the west side. Libraries all over the place, but this is it. I think I've died and gone to heaven, so you're my people. So I wrote this book, and I got a call about 2 years ago in April, from the History Press. They do these wonderful local histories, the History Press is also connected. You've seen these probably at Barnes & Noble. You've also seen the Arcadia books, which are the wonderful, mostly photograph books. They're part of the same, they merged. So it's a national press that does local histories. And the guy called me, sort of out of the blue, and said, we have a book on Baltimore in World War II. We have a book on Pittsburgh in World War II. Would you like to do a book on Detroit? And before he could finish the sentence, I said,
Yes.
I didn't say hell yes, but I said yes, I'll take it. Because what a rich topic, you know. And I seem to be writing and thinking a lot about World War II. Even though I was born 11 years after the shooting ended, I'm just fascinated by that generation. And I'm fascinated, and I find the stories endlessly interesting, particularly in southeastern Michigan. And when I talk about Detroit, I kind of mean Metro Detroit. You know, I include Ypsilanti and Ann Arbor and Roseville. I know all these places, which is kind of unusual because I have to give you a disclaimer. I am not from Detroit. I'm a Hoosier from Indianapolis, Indiana.
We won't hold that against you.
I've been here 23 years now, and so I can pass a map test. But when I first got here, and occasionally I will still lapse, I'll say, I'll meet you over there on Gratiot Avenue, or Lasher, DeQuindre, you know, what are these streets? And I also want to say, you know, I've discovered as an outsider, I mostly hung around with people on the west side. You asked me if I know these. For 10 years, only west siders. And they brainwashed me and told me what a bunch of losers everybody on the east side is. And they get lost and they don't know how to drive and so forth. Then I had a girlfriend from the east side and suddenly I heard the other story. Same thing. And really, pretty much, you're all the same, I can say as an outsider.
We're all losers.
Sorry?
No?
No, all winners. All winners.
All right, good.
Don't get me in trouble at the crowd already. So I'm an outsider, and so I never rode a Bob Lowe boat. I never went to Hudson's department store downtown. No, please. We had our own cool stuff in Indianapolis. I miss those things. I've talked to people who did those things, and I had to imagine what it was like. I never went to the Ford Rotunda. I didn't think about Better Made potato chips or Sanders hot fudge or Faygo or Verner's. None of this stuff really meant anything to me till I came here 23 years ago. And so writing this book really just deepened my understanding of what makes this place special. Southeastern Michigan, Detroit. Everybody knows the cliche arsenal of democracy. I said to the guy, can I write the book I would want to read about a topic that other people have written about? He said, sure, tell stories. Just give us 40,000 words and 50 images. And I signed the dotted line. And then for about a year, I was a sponge, you know, walking around, gathering stories, going to archives, looking for photographs. Elizabeth Clemens helped me at the Ruther to get some pictures. I'd like to come to that one maybe.
Please do, yeah. At Board House, too.
Oh, okay.
Yes, yeah. Well, it'll be in the activities building, yeah.
She's very good, and she was very generous in helping me. I wanted to write the book I would want to read, and I wanted to tell stories. And they gave me free license to do that. Basically, all they did was correct a few typos. So, good or bad, this is me. This is me telling stories that I heard. Like I say, I was a sponge. And my family and friends are sick of me talking about Detroit in World War II, because you eat it, sleep it, breathe it. But I come away loving the subject more than when I started doing it, which is a true testament to how interesting it is and how noble Detroit's mission was during World War II. I describe this book ultimately as a love letter to my adopted city. The people of World War II in Detroit and in America, they were not angels. There were bad people, there were draft dodgers, there were black marketeers, there were criminals, they're human beings. But for the most part, I was deeply, deeply impressed with the spirit, with what I saw, what I saw happening. You know, I try to impress to my students, we could have lost World War II. By the time the U.S. gets involved, we're very far behind. The way we gathered ourselves as a nation, the leadership that we had, we were fortunate to have good leaders at various levels, and I think Detroit stepped up. Like, I passed out a little piece that was in the Free Press on the 70th anniversary of VE Day last year. So I walk away very, very inspired, And I wanted to write a book not just about production, which is what Detroit is known for, automobile companies building bombers and tanks, but I wanted to write about also military people in the city. It was it was very obvious the war was going on. I also wanted to write about streetcars and radio and movie theaters and sports and Hank Greenberg. And I had talked about race, I had talked about the race riot of 1943. It's a panoramic look. And I've had enough people say, kid, you got it right, or, you're on the right track. This seems to jog a lot of people's memories, so that's the most gratifying thing I can hear. So I wrote this book, and I thought I usually start by just kind of laying out some surprises I discovered in writing about Detroit in World War II. And the first one I would say, by the way, I say soda. What do you say? Yeah, see, I'm a little bit freakish still.
I believe you're the same as soda pop.
How many natives do I have in the room? Is everybody a native? Who are my other aliens from another place? Where are you from?
Chicago and Lexington, Kentucky.
Okay, so you know what it's like, the planet Detroit. We're visitors, we'll never meet. You didn't ride a Boblo boat, right?
I did. I've been here long ago.
I'm not even sure exactly when did they stop running. It must have been 90.
87, so it was after that.
Yeah,
93.
Too bad. Well, I told you about the origin. I thought I'd talk about surprises I discovered in writing it. Maybe do a couple of short readings, and then I got a slideshow of images. The first thing I would say, the big surprise to me, I knew about production. I knew we were the arsenal of democracy. The entire country mobilized, building munitions like you cannot believe. But Detroit led the way. I did not know the scale of the production. It's bigger than you think if you really look at it closely. 8,686 B-24 Liberator bombers out of a bomber plant that was built in 5 months on an apple orchard. You got to be kidding me, Ford Motor Company. Edsel Ford, by the way, is a hero of that story. He's the one who made Willow Run go. 22,000 tanks out of the Chrysler tank plant, way out there, 12 Mile and Mound in Warren Township and Wheatfield. These are purpose-built buildings designed by Albert Kahn, who seems to have designed everything of importance. And he designed, of course, the Packard plant.
And the Edsel Ford House. Edsel Ford House.
Yes, you name it. Yeah. Everywhere you look. University of Michigan, most of those, the best buildings were designed by Albert Kahn. And I like to talk about him because the Fisher Building, for instance, Detroit's most beautiful art object, I think it was called. Albert Kahn was the son of a German rabbi. And frankly, he did more than any person I can think of to beat Hitler. I think that's a nice, kind of satisfying kind of thing to think about. Not everybody thought, by the way, and I mentioned in this little piece, not everybody thought America could rise to the occasion. Most people right up to probably December 6, 1941 did not want to go to war. We were isolationist. We had this illusion of being protected by the oceans, and the world was much smaller, and we found that out. But most people did not want to go to war, including around here until Pearl Harbor happened. And actually, a lot of people didn't know if America could get its act together to fight another war. I think we had just fought one 20 years earlier. It left a bad taste in people's mouths. We felt we had been used by the British and the French, and not again, we're not going to do that again. So I understand isolationism, and I understand the reluctance to go to war. But an example of a skeptic would be Hermann Goering, Hitler's Reichsmarshal, one of the most arrogant SOBs who's ever lived, I'm sure. He was asked in 1940, well, are you worried about the United States entering the war against Germany? And he said, no, the Americans only know how to make refrigerators and razor blades. And we jammed that down his throat with some steel. We can make many different things. The bomber plant, it's quite incredible that the scale and the level of production. The aircraft industry out on the West Coast didn't think Henry Ford could make bombers and couldn't make planes. Mass producing, using automobile techniques. A plane has a lot more safety issues. Every one of these B-24s, and that's a fresh one right off the line flying over smoggy Detroit, They require over 300,000 rivets, each one of those babies. And the aircraft industry, you know, Boeing and Lockheed and all those folks, they said, Detroit can't really do that. And actually, Edsel Ford and Charles Sorensen, Henry's engineer, the designer of the Model T process, went out, reported to his father, and they said, you know, out on the West Coast, they're building maybe 2 or 3 planes a day, and they feel pretty good about that. Well, Henry Ford, who was crotchety, I think he was born crotchety, but he's in his 70s by now. Edsel kind of had to keep him on a leash. He made Willow Run happen. Henry went to the press like he often did, and I guess you could say kind of shot his mouth off. He said, you know, they're building 2 or 3 a day at those plants. We're going to build 1 per hour at Willow Run plant. And I'm sure Edsel and Sorensen, oh my God, what have you just said? Can we do it? And it took us a while. Willow Run was built. It's probably the biggest building in the world at the time. It's quite an engineering feat, just amazing. 20-mile-long assembly lines. And by the way, if you've ever seen an overhead picture of the Willow Run buildings, and I love those people, it's an L shape. You ever wonder why that might be?
Yeah.
It's not anything about the engineering. You know what it is?
Oh, yeah.
Wayne County.
Wayne County. Yep.
My understanding is, yes, a surveyor's error was made, and Henry wanted the damn thing in Washtenaw County, which was Republican. And he, you know, part of it was going to go into Sodom and Gomorrah, Wayne County. Taxes, unions, democratic machine politics. So Henry told the guys, you know, Edsel and Sorensen, you make it an L shape. It's quite interesting. Very hard to do. It took the plan a year to get going. After 1 year, Willow Run had produced exactly 1 plane.
And the nickname?
Will It Run. Those people on the West Coast were laughing. By 1943, 44, into 45, we were making 1 plane coming out of there every 63 minutes, every 58 minutes. I've heard different stories. It's an unbelievable production. That's how we beat the Axis. That's how we beat Germany. That's how we beat Japan. In addition to the heroism of our soldiers, we just overwhelmed them with production. So Willow Run became quite a success story. It's a brand name. People knew about Willow Run. I like to also, I have to quote obnoxious people. Marshal Stalin. Uncle Joe, you know, or did you know that the USSR, Russia, Soviet Union was our ally for a few minutes? They were fighting the Nazis. It was our bad guy. But Stalin met with Churchill and President Roosevelt at these summit meetings. Yalta was the last one. The first one was at Tehran in Iran. And at the end of several days of talking, they had a big banquet. And at the end of the night, Stalin, well, maybe not at the end of the night, somewhere in the middle of the night, Marshal Stalin, he's about 5'1", 5'2", he's a pretty short guy, stands with his glass, I presume, of vodka, and he says to the gathered, let's drink a toast to Detroit, the city that is winning this war. So people knew about our production. In Henry Ford and the 1 bomber per hour, it's a little bit compared to the Liberty ships. You know the name associated with the Liberty ships? They were building 1 every 14 days. Henry Kaiser. Production miracles. The production's bigger than I ever thought it would be. It's just massive. And not only the giant auto plants here in Detroit, but every tool and die shop, every radiator, radiator company pressing out 20 million combat helmets, almost everything in the city was geared toward war production. The last civilian car, as you know, rolled off the line, I think in February of 1942. And when we put our mind to it, we did it. So incredible. The arsenal of democracy, you're darn right. And Detroit was the leader in this. So the scale of production was a surprise to me. And it's bigger than you even think, probably. Connected to that, and this will really shock you as I look at Detroit during World War II, I was impressed by what I saw as far as teamwork, bipartisanship, people pulling in the same direction, dropping their petty differences to pull together. Unfortunately, it took Pearl Harbor to get us to unite, and that did it. But you have Republicans and Democrats working together. Can you believe that? It makes me sad as I think about our country right now and how divided. Could we do it today? Who knows? I hope we don't have to do that. During World War II, you had government, big business, and as President Roosevelt might have said, labor, working together, more or less. The dollar a year men. You know, you can say what you like about Franklin Roosevelt. I think one of his great skills was putting the right people in the right places. You know, starting with George C. Marshall and then choosing Eisenhower for overlord and so forth. When France fell in May, June of 1940, this is when the alarm bells go off. France fell like a house of cards. They're at the gates. They're ready to attack Britain. We're next. So President Roosevelt made a telephone call because we had the 19th biggest army military in the world in 1940. We had about 170,000 pretty badly prepared troops. They were fighting, shooting old Springfield rifles that hadn't been shot since 1918. They were shooting flour at cardboard tanks. That's okay.
We'll get it back in a second. Yep. Okay.
I'll get to the slideshow. Roosevelt understood, we got to get our act together. We got to convert, we got to start making the weaponry of war. And so the first call he made was to Detroit, to William Knudsen. Big Bill Knudsen, Danish immigrant who'd risen through the ranks, admired by everybody in the auto industry, one of the most competent guys. And I can almost imagine the phone call in June of 1940. Mr. Knudsen, we need a crash munitions program. Will you lead it? And what's interesting to me, William Knudsen was a hardcore Republican. He didn't like the New Deal. He really didn't care for Franklin Roosevelt. And of course his answer was, yes, sir, Mr. President, where do you need me? And within a week he was in Washington. And he organized, basically was in charge of the munitions production. So bipartisanship, teamwork, that's how we did it. And again, there were people who were not doing the right things, but generally speaking, I think people from the shop floor to the top management, kids in schools, people at home, housewives, Rosie the Riveter. You got to talk about Rosie the Riveter. I want to talk about those people on the West Coast. They're kind of. Did you hear about the great event at Willow Run, sponsored by the Yankee Air Museum last October? You should have been there. They set the world record, the Guinness record. Did you hear about this?
Yeah.
You can find it if you look for it on the computer. We set the Guinness Book of World Records last October out at Willow Run for the most Rosies gathered in one spot. And they actually had their Guinness guy out there, and they have pretty strict standards. And how that started was those people out on the West Coast set the record first. And they had 1,050. And the idea is you have to wear a red bandana, red socks, blue work suit, and work boots. You have to come out in the... So they had a little over 1,000. Damn it, it ought to be in Michigan. Yankee Air Museum, Oregon. Let's beat that record. And I went out there and took some pictures. My God, I've never seen so much red. Those bandanaed women. I saw little baby girls wearing little bandanas and little red socks. I saw little 7- and 8-year-old girls, prideful. And by the way, even my students who don't know much history, they all know we can do it. They all know about Rosie the Riveter, thank goodness. That's it. Particularly for the young women, it's a great image. I saw women in their 20s who had these tattoos. Everybody under 30 has a tattoo, or a bunch of them. I saw from across the way, she had the "We Can Do It" Rosie tattooed on her arm, big. She was really committed to it. And then, of course, at the event, I saw the real Rosies. These ladies who were in their late 80s, early 90s, riding around in golf carts. They're ready to do it now. They could right now go in the factory and probably do the job again. I was highly impressed with these folks. When I think about, we did set the record. Theirs was 1,050. I think we had 2,100. We blew them away. That record deserves to be. There's no one Rosie the Riveter, but certainly I think Michigan and Willow Run is really the home of Rosie the Riveter. So I hope they don't try it again, because we'll just have to do it again. When I think of our ability, the teamwork and our production, there's a two-word phrase that comes to my mind, and I think it really captures the attitude of Detroit during World War II. It comes from the military. The phrase is can do, can do. And I'm not sure we always have that attitude today, but you need us to build a bomber plant to make 8,600 bombers out on an orchard field, we'll do it, can do. You need us to build a tank plant, you need us to convert, you need us to beat Hitler and Japan, can do, can do, can do. It's quite inspiring. I can also use another word. In fact, I wanted them to put it in the title of the book, and they wouldn't do it. It says Detroit in World War II. That's how the series goes. There's a word, if I had to boil down Detroiters during World War II, and people like to hear this, I use a word that is no longer used, and I want you to help me. I want it to come back. I want you to... The word, if I could describe Detroiters in the 40s during World War II, what did they have? They had moxie. Moxie. Raise your hand if you know what I'm talking about, the word moxie.
Yeah,
Well, yeah, what is it? I spoke at the Jewish Community Center, West Bloomfield. It's chutzpah. What are other words you would use? Determination, guts, spunk. You get knocked down, you dust yourself off, you get up. Unconquerable. Moxie. So no matter what we do tonight, I want you to, when you go out there, I want you to use the word moxie at least 5 times every day for the next week. And eventually it's going to come back. And I know it's a good thing. Somebody say, I have moxie, I'm really happy about it. A third thing, so production, teamwork, a third thing that surprised me in writing this book, and this is not pleasant, but it was the racial situation in Detroit. Not that long ago, segregation, Jim Crow, there were pretty segregated conditions, and the city was very tense because you had a lot of people moving up to work in the war plants, white and black, suddenly crammed together, standing in line, fighting for recreational space, fighting for jobs. Housing was in very short supply. And of course, it exploded into the biggest race riot in the country in June of 1943, and I had to talk about it. And other boom towns also had race riots during World War II. Detroit's was the worst one, but Los Angeles, El Paso, Mobile, Alabama. The racial situation was not a very good one. It was beginning to change. But, we had a group of Tuskegee Airmen up at Selfridge Field, right up the road, the red-tailed black pilots. They had to be real careful when they went off base, where they couldn't sit at a Cunningham's drugstore counter in a lot of places. They couldn't go to dances, all-night bowling alleys, except on certain nights. They couldn't, they had to be very careful. There was not even an officers' club for these guys. So, they couldn't go in and have a beer at the officers' club. The good news out of all this is that I think World War II would signal the end of Jim Crow. We couldn't waste people. We're fighting Hitler, who talks about a master race. Segregation begins to break down at the end of World War II. And I think it's a good story in the end. But this was a pretty segregated place in many ways, racially segregated. I think the war forced us to really think about what are we fighting for here? Democracy, citizenship. We wanted those things, the 4 freedoms of Franklin Roosevelt. We wanted them to mean something. So the racial situation surprised me, the depth of the segregation. And then the last thing I'll say that was a bit of a surprise to me, how do I say this? The 24-hourness of Detroit. The 24, you know what I mean? This place the joint was jumping all the time everywhere during World War II. We had a population explosion. You could go to the movies at midnight. Second and third shift people could go bowling in the middle of the night. You could go to these dance ballrooms, the Vanity and the Crystal and the Grandy ballrooms, these wonderful, gigantic dance ballrooms. Incredible. A lot of action going on there. And I discovered these ballrooms had floating dance floors. Do you know what I mean by that? Who knows what a floating dance floor is? What would you say it is?
There's springs underneath it so that your feet don't get tight.
Beautiful marble floor on springs. And I'm told 3,000 dancers could be out at one time on the dance floor at the Vanity Ballroom on East Jefferson. I'm sure many more were out there on certain Saturday nights during World War II. And I'm told the springs give the jitterbuggers and the Lindy Hoppers a little bit more bounce. I talked to a woman, a wonderful woman. She's probably 90. I think she was 89 when I talked to her. She was 14 when the war ended. And she said, we went out dancing every weekend, me and my girlfriends. It was good, clean fun. We had a blast. And we drank Burners. That's what they served at these places, you know. So, you know, the dance culture of those days. Of course, Black Bottom and Paradise Valley, the Paradise Theater, the Greystone Ballroom. And also, you know, there were honky-tonks. You could go to kind of sleazy places and you could go to classy places. What I say? The music of the 1940s. What are your favorite World War II songs? Name a song that you love.
Sing, sing, sing. In the mood.
In the Mood.
Sing, sing, sing.
Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy.
Yeah.
And White Christmas. They're either about longing and separation, or they're sort of these novelty, happy. Pistol Packin' Mama. Rosie the Riveter had a song. I keep discovering these little novelty songs from World War II, and they were on jukeboxes and record players and radio. My students really don't get this. They don't know what a jukebox is. I have to explain. But I discovered these novelty songs. The last one, just this week, I discovered one. Milkman, Keep Those Bottles Quiet.
Oh,
You know, for the shift worker sleeping in the daytime. But I want to tell you about Hamtramck Mama. There was a song there, you know, white and black people brought their music with them as they moved north. And there was a duo of brothers, the York brothers from Kentucky, came up and they went into a little tiny Universal recording studio in East Jefferson and recorded a novelty song called Hamtramck Mama. This is an all-adult group here. I guess I can tell you about it. It's a little bit risque. It's about a woman who works really hard at her job and then she knows how to shimmy, you know? And she's a little bit, you know, out there, party girl. This thing took off. It became a surprise hit. It sold 300,000 copies. It was on every jukebox in town. The mayor of Hamtramck didn't get the joke. In fact, he thought it was insulting and a little bit, so he pushed through an ordinance to ban the play of Hamtramck Mama in the city limits of Hamtramck, which only increased the appeal. The Yorks went back in and they recorded another song called Highland Park Mama. The joke, they went one too many times to the well, it didn't sell. And by that time, shellac was in short supply and it was over, you know. But I love the musical culture of those years. Detroit had a streetcar system of over 500 miles. I think the last one rolled off of Woodward Avenue in 1956. At some stops, they crowded with soldiers and women with their children going to the Hudsons and war workers. At some stops, it came once a minute. And I'm going to shock you, ladies and gentlemen. Not only were women hired to be, you know, Wendy the welder, Rosie the riveter in the war plants, they were hiring women to drive taxi cabs, to drive streetcars and buses. They were called conductorettes. And it's quite interesting. You know, a lot of the men, some men didn't like this. They didn't like women. I talked to a guy, I didn't like all these dames in slacks. You know, women changing the oil and working at the gas station. But women stepped up. Women had all kinds of new roles. I'm a big sports guy. Do we have Red Wing fans in the room? Is there a game tonight? I don't know. Am I fighting against something? I discovered, you know, the games went on during World War II. You know, President Roosevelt said, it's too important to morale, let's keep the games going. But most of the good players were gone. They went off in the service, and this was true around the country. You've probably seen A League of Their Own where they had the women baseball players. So sports continued, but, you know, they didn't have the top people. They were people who were sort of draft rejects or whatever. Too old, too young. The Lions continued to play at Old Briggs Stadium. They were 0-11 in 1942.
Nothing's changed.
Who's been in the old red brick barn on Grand River? Oh, man. I got to go the last year with my friend in Ann Arbor. We didn't have hockey in Indianapolis. He said, let's go to a Red Wings playoff game. And I thought we were going to fall into the ice. We were in the balcony. It was so tight and intimate. And to me, it smelled like 60 years of perspiration, beer, and cigar smoke. And I loved it. I loved it. The Red Wings continued to play. They won a Stanley Cup in 1943. The next year, by the way, I went to the Joe Louis Arena. Man, we're so far back, it wasn't the same. I'm glad I got to go one time. And then there's baseball, the Tigers. Hank Greenberg. You could talk about Joe Louis, too. Joe Louis and Hank Greenberg were the best-known Detroit athletes during the war. Joe went in as a private, gave up big salary, and said, I don't want any special treatment. And he went in and he was used on recruiting posters, and he traveled around the combat zones doing boxing exhibitions. The estimate is Joe Louis, probably 5 million servicemen got to see Joe Louis box live during World War II. And Joe insisted that the guys who come to see me, the crowds have to be integrated. So you can see the seeds of change are beginning to happen. And then Hank Greenberg. I mean, I knew there's this guy, Hank Greenberg, you know, he's one of the statues out at Comerica Park. I knew about him a little bit. My God, this guy really was Detroit's answer to Babe Ruth. 6'4", hit 58 home runs, one in the late 30s. He was a slugger, yeah. Hall of Fame player. And he's a hero to me for a number of reasons. Very courageous guy. One reason is, I don't know if you knew this, but he was the only openly Jewish ball player in baseball in the late 30s. And he wouldn't play on Rosh Hashanah and high holidays. And this didn't go over well with some people, and he was taunted and called names. He said once, I have a great quote from him. He says, you know, I'm always in the spotlight. I got to produce. If I don't produce on the field, some son of a bitch in some stadium is going to call me every name in the book. So I have to produce. And he did. Home runs, gold gloves. He carried himself with grace and dignity. And by the way, late in his career, I think he ended up in the National League with Pittsburgh, and he mentored Jackie Robinson a little bit on how to deal with the abuse that comes to being the pioneer. The other thing, Hank went into the service right with Pearl Harbor. He was in the Army Air Corps, away from baseball. The best years of his career gone, 4+ years. Hank Greenberg was gone longer than any other major league ball player. He was in the China, India, Burma theater. He came back with 4 battle stars. I mean, he's a war hero. And then, a writer's always looking for a big finish for the book, and here's what I found. Hank Greenberg returned to the Tigers July 4th, 1945, after 4 years off in the service. He wanted his job back, like millions of returning veterans. He wanted his job back. And he hit a home run on 4th of July, 1945, and 40,000 people at Briggs went crazy. But, he was older. He was slower. He was beat up. He was injury prone. Some people kind of thought he was washed up. He played well enough for the next 3 months. But what I found out is Hank Greenberg came up to the plate in the 9th inning of the last game of the 1945 season in St. Louis, playing against the Browns. And bad weather, there was hardly anybody in the stands. The bases were loaded. In fact, they loaded the bases to pitch to Hank Greenberg. They thought, this guy will be an easy out. 9th inning, last game, 1945 season. Takes the ball, then a strike, and then the third pitch, he lines right over the left field fence, just inside the foul pole. Grand slam home run, puts the Tigers into the World Series. You got to be kidding me. That's in the book. By the way, he said, he said, when I as a Jew hit a home run, he said this in the 30s, I feel like I'm hitting one against Hitler. And that became a chapter title, So it was bigger. He was bigger than sports. Oh, I do have to add, I'm a Cubs fan, and they beat the Cubs in 7 games. Hank hit another couple of home runs, and the Cubs haven't been back since. But this is our year, I'm sure of it. I could talk about many other things. The Italian prisoners of war down at Fort Wayne and the fairgrounds. Barbara Williams told me, oh yeah, we girls, we used to go down by the fence and flirt with the Italian prisoners of war. Those guys were so happy. German prisoners of war and the Italians. There were about 6,000 in Michigan. And I have a new book I'm going to work on, prisoner of war camps in Michigan. There were 32 of them. About 5,000 Germans and about 1,000 Italians. And the Italians, who I write about from Fort Wayne, they were so happy. They had little light jobs. They got they could get script to spend at the canteen. They got 3 squares a day. They were 10,000 miles from Hitler, Mussolini, and the war, and they just said they loved it so much that most of those guys became American citizens after the war. They married an American woman and came back, something like that. So there are just a whole bunch of stories that I could do. Let me, I think, why don't I go to the slideshow if I can get this working, and it'll kind of be, hopefully it just went to sleep. Okay.
There we go. And you've got the...
yeah, I'll do it this way.
Okay, whatever is more comfortable with. Yep.
So, if you can see that okay, that's a B-24. I wanted this for the cover, and they did put it on the back cover. But that's a B-24 Liberator flying over a very smoggy... Okay. For some reason, so before World War II, oh, they're out of order.
Oh, really? It looked like they were
I've had
good.
this problem.
Try the clicker.
Okay.
There we go.
They're completely out of order. Push this.
Yeah, try that. Oh, that's gonna...
No,
Oh,
that's,
Okay.
is he?
yeah.
Sorry. Well, hold on. She's got it.
Okay,
Yeah.
can you do it where I can just click on each one individually? I think I'm going to have to do that, if I can. Otherwise, I'll just read a little bit, because I'm running, I've got a 3-hour talk, trying to keep it to an hour.
You know that those aircraft, when they left Willow Run,
Yeah,
were war ready.
Yes.
Before they would take off for their first flight, they would taxi
There we
out.
go. Okay.
There was a big mound.
Oh,
of
the
dirt
slideshow's
they
gonna make,
built,
it's gonna advance
and
it
they
though.
would test
I
all
can't
their
do that.
weapons into that mound.
wow, yeah.
And when they took off, they were going to war.
And you know also, that's true, and you know also they were flown, a lot of women
Or the
were flown.
images. Well, we had it, yeah. Remember
Have you heard of the Wasps?
To advance. Try advancing.
Out at the Air Zoo,
Manually,
at
okay.
Kalamazoo, they got a whole room dedicated to the women, the pilots. Some of them died.
A lot of them died.
The Wasp flew those planes.
We had, remember you had it earlier and it worked fine?
If it doesn't work, I can just do a couple of...
Okay.
I would, no,
Yeah.
if you want, I can
Okay.
press this if I'm not in people's
Okay.
way, and I can manually do it.
Well, let's see.
You got it? Yeah, stand off to the side. Just stand off to the side.
Oh, I can
Yeah.
do this. I'll do it. All right.
All right, okay, good. All right, all right.
Now what am I doing? These are women against going to war in downtown Detroit in early 1941. You know, Roosevelt came up with this way to get equipment to Britain and to
Lend-Lease.
even Soviet Union called Lend-Lease. Congress had made it illegal to trade with a country at war. So he said, we're going to Lend-Lease weapons, to Britain, bullets and bombs, and a completely illegal thing. But, Roosevelt was good at kind of improvising like that. And I saw a sign that said, women will not lend or lease their children. I don't know if this is going to work or not. Nah, it's not going to work. I'll tell you what, all the pictures are in the book.
Well, you can do them out of order.
All right, okay, all right.
You know what they are.
It tells a nice story. But
Come on, order.
okay. This is a streetcar.
You chalk it up.
No.
Sure?
Yeah.
Just let it go.
I'll just do it this way. So, because it told such a good story. I had to have a picture of a UAW poster, no absenteeism at the war plants. And people I talked to, the men and women, said that these things had to be right, just like you said, because those guys were thinking about those boys out there, brothers, fathers. It has to be right when they're out there. This is the streetcar down at Grand River downtown. Who's ridden a streetcar in Detroit? Maybe you're too young. And how much did it cost?
Nickel.
I think it cost 6 cents or a nickel.
It was a nickel.
Nickel.
And-
And you got a transfer.
And when it went to a dime, that was...
Yeah, that's almost insurrection. This is Detroit's first conductorette, Marguerite Watson. She's going home from her shift, and Kinsel's, I think, was a drugstore.
Yes. Here's what's supposed to go.
These are the Italian prisoners of war. And it's a little bit of a stereotype picture.
Yeah.
They have the
Violin.
Italians. But you can see they're happy. You know, most of them, there are hardly any escape attempts. Put it mildly.
They were trying to break in.
Yeah, right.
From British,
And
Only women.
from America.
I'm going to write it. This is my next project because it's a great story. You know, there was a no fraternization rule with these prisoners of war. They'd send them up to, say, Cairo, Michigan, and let them pick sugar beets. So the first day, Farmer John and his wife, ooh, the Germans are over there, the Italians, here, keep away from them. Second day, they're out in the hot sun, and the wife says, come on the porch, boys, and drink some of my lemonade. By day 3 or 4, they're inside eating apple pie. You know, you remind me of my mother. I mean, it's a wonderful human story. There were a few Nazis and fascists, but the majority of these guys were just like kids. We're skipping to the end again, but that's VJ Day. Who has a memory of VJ Day? I don't think anybody knows.
You did.
I'm told it was the biggest.
Older than I look.
Right. Yeah. I'm talking about World War II, not.
Well, World War I is a little fuzzy for me.
You were a tiny tot. I'm told it was
I was
the
born
biggest.
in 1938.
Oh my gosh, yeah. So you remember VJ Day?
Yes.
Where were you living?
3531 Cadillac Boulevard. It's 3 houses off the corner of Mac and Cadillac. The Altus Brewery was kitty corner from our.
Yeah. Oh, speaking of breweries, by the way, and that's a great story. Did you know Detroit had a victory beer during World War
Oh,
II?
yeah.
The Coppitz Melcher Brewery downtown had V beer and 100 different labels. It was 3-2 beer, of course, and each label had a plane or a tank or a submarine or a piece of ordnance on it, so you could be patriotic when you're drinking your beer. And then they also had Blackout Brew, a darker beer. But I am told that the VJ was the biggest street party ever. This is Grand Circus Park. What did you do on that
Just
day?
a little bit.
What's that? Oh, yeah.
Somebody up there.
There we go. We had Chinatown, you know, in Detroit, and they were very happy on VJ Day because Japan had been brutalizing them for years.
Chinese.
So they're celebrating in their neighborhood down in Peterborough. Big day. Here's the happiest serviceman in the world. The night of VJ night. He's got 4 babes on his arms. Barbara Williams. She was 14 in 1945. She looked at me and she said, what was it? She said, I wanted to go downtown. She lived at 6 Mile in Wildomere. She said, I wanted to go downtown and kiss a sailor. Didn't matter what, you know, she just had it in her mind. Her father said, we got a babysitting job for you. She didn't get to do it. And she's bitter 70 years old. She wanted to go downtown and be part of the action. Cramped war conditions. Housing was in very short supply for World War
Can I
II.
tell you a quick?
Oh, please, yes.
My grandmother lived over just off of Connor,
Yeah.
around Charlevoix or someplace.
Yeah.
Like that. And she had a boarding house
Yes.
during the war. And the rooms, they were small. Those houses didn't have big rooms. There were 2 beds in each room. And there were 4 people using those beds.
Hot
They
bedding.
were on shifts.
Yeah.
And the bed would still be warm when the next person
Yeah.
got into it.
They call them hot bunks, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
They did.
Yeah, look at this. With all those kids.
Civil defense drills. This is in an elementary school, in an integrated school, by the way, in Detroit. I think blackout curtains and all that, it's just normal business, you know, brownouts. We were worried that Detroit would be obviously a nice target for the Axis. Turns out they couldn't reach us, thank God. But we were doing civil. This is the day after, a couple days after Pearl Harbor, down on Woodward. Isolationist, anti-war feeling evaporated overnight. People are ready to enlist, and you can see the women are there too. That's the can-do attitude. Bring it on. And the line at the Fort Street Army Induction Center wrapped around the block the day after Pearl Harbor. I killed 2 birds with one
very
stone.
good.
I found a nice picture of Joe and Hank, Detroit's biggest sports icons, at Briggs just before the war. Question, is Joe wearing a zoot suit? I don't quite know.
No.
Would you say it is?
No, I wouldn't.
I don't think it's, I think he's just wearing a really expensive, nice suit.
He doesn't rest it.
Yeah. What is a zoot suit? My students don't know what that is.
Well, the zoot suit would be
Striped.
longer than that.
Yeah.
The jacket would be longer. The pants would be large at top and really go to a tight peg around the ankle.
And a hat maybe with a feather and bright colors and all
Yeah,
that.
there'd be some hat, a headpiece that made you stand out.
Long watch chain too. What's that? The long watch chain.
Yeah, that's right.
The War Production Board declared zoot suits, they can't do them after a while because it was a waste of cloth. And I'm told also conservation, ration coupon books, 3 gallons a week with an A coupon. Couldn't get tires to save your life. Couldn't get silks and nylons. What'd they use those for? Parachutes, gliders. And I am told, does anybody know what I mean when I say people had bottled stockings? Young girls would paint a line on the back of their leg and try to get it straight. And I would say by the end of a hot date, if they came home probably all smeared, nobody was fooled by these drawing the line. This is at the Warren Tank Arsenal, Chrysler. Nice teamwork picture. Kind of reminds me of the Diego Rivera painting, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Patriotism, flag. This is my, kind of bouncing back and forth, that's my university clock tower. The day after VJ Day, they rang the bell. That tower was dedicated to the fallen U of D men of World War I. The day after VJ Day, the bell rang 137 times for the students who would not be coming back in the fall. And I like the birds in that picture. Telenews, a 24-hour newsreel-only theater.
It was on Woodward Avenue.
On Woodward Avenue. It's now
near
a
Grand Circus Park.
right. It's now a
Blues?
now a techno dance club.
Yes,
There you go.
I brought my dinosaur with me.
Yeah, right. The kids' cover's already been blown. So
How, like, if those were newsreels of what's going on in Europe?
March of Time and
Yeah, but how long would it take for them to get the newsreel?
oh, there was a lag time. I would say 3 to 4 weeks. Of
Oh,
being real
okay,
fast.
okay.
This, my students really don't understand. But telenews, you could go there at midnight. They had a news ticker in the lobby, and they had a radio station in the basement. And it's a techno dance club now. I bet the people who dance there have no idea.
Even if you went to the regular movies,
They always had
newsreels.
The war, you could not
During
escape.
the war.
No. I actually think it was kind of fun to be a kid during World War II. Was it fun?
Yeah, it was.
Your face just lit up. I'm told there was a time in Detroit when people didn't lock their doors. And,
That was way after.
you could ride your bike all over town, and if you did something wrong, a neighbor would report to you.
I had a military uniform for every branch of the military.
Oh my gosh.
My mother had those all set up for me.
And I bet you know a lot of geography. Kids were studying maps, they were carefully following the war. The greatest generation, you're too young for that, but the greatest generation, they know their geography and they know a lot of history because they have to.
You ever heard of V-mail?
V-mail, absolutely, sure.
That was special mail that you used to send to the military.
Yeah.
The military.
And strap drives, of course.
Of course.
Let's see, this is the first tank off the line at the Chrysler tank plant in April of 1942. And it was a big special day. That's the M3 tank. It's smashing a telephone pole into toothpicks. And it was a big event. The mayor, governors there, military brass, it was on live radio. And a lot of the employees got the day off and they're up on the roof watching. A nice spring day. This is a P-40 Warhawk flying over, protecting Detroit from possible attack. Very common sight. Much clearer downtown than the other picture. You can see the Detroit River up there in the upper left. And maybe the Penobscot building. There's my beer. That one cost me $100, people. I hope you like it. Some pictures they gave it to me for free. I love it. But, I had to have my beer picture. Victory beer. They wanted some current pictures, and so I went around at some risk to my own personal life and took photos. I am now a published photographer. The History Press wanted these. So this is the Bluebird Inn on Tyerman on the west side. It was a hopping jazz club in the 1940s. And there's some graffiti. It's seen better days. Let's put it that way.
Oh,
There's the vanity, yeah.
Yeah.
East Jefferson, you can see the deco styling.
But I know the building.
Oh, yeah.
I remember the sign.
Didn't have trees growing on the roof back then.
Did you get to stay out in the summer till the lights came on?
Oh, yeah. Oh, we all did it.
It's like 10 o'clock, 10:30.
We all did it.
This is the Broadhead Naval Armory in East Jefferson near the bridge. This is my last picture actually, but it's out of order. It just says honor peace, and I thought it would be a nice little thing. So let's see what we got next. Anybody recognize this place?
Yeah, it's on Van Dyke.
I
mean, Mount, that's
Mount,
Mount.
exactly. 12 and Mount.
You're real good.
Yeah. I want to go there now. You want to go after?
Yeah.
You're buying. And I don't want 3-2. I want the regular. The Delano family opened this in 1946, and I wanted to show, hey, Detroit, World War II is all around us if you just look. They start, why is it called the Victory Inn? Because they're celebrating the great victory that people. Paradise Valley, Hastings Street, you can see it doesn't exist anymore, it's under the freeway. And so I took a picture of the historical marker. Duke Ellington, Dinah Washington, the Ink Spot, Sarah Vaughan, various nightclubs, the Horseshoe, the 666. It was a vibrant place back in the 30s and 40s. I love this picture. I took this one in August. That's downtown Hamtramck. The B24 Espresso Bar. And you go in there, and all the young people from Eastern Michigan are on their devices, and they probably couldn't tell you, why is it called B24? Because just down the road, we kicked Hitler's behind by making B24 downloads. It's around us everywhere. One of my part-time jobs, I introduce movies at the Redford Theater. Anybody been to the Redford? Yes. Fantastic, right? They paint, it's done in I'm an MC sometimes, and right after Pearl Harbor, it's done in the style of a Japanese kabuki theater. They painted all that stuff over right after Pearl Harbor. They're just now, it's a beautiful restoration job, and that's the last piece. Oops. I wanted to say one other thing. I'm a photographer. I wanted to take a picture of the Redford, and I got there on a nice August day, and below on the marquee it said, "Coming next week, Jurassic Park." So I had to take a sort of arty shot, and I got this is a, whoops. I hate technology sometimes. This is a Hudson's department store ground level window. Instead of showing spring fashions, you see the Constitution, pictures of MacArthur, maybe a Japanese sword, and patriotism everywhere. This is the day the Roosevelts visited Detroit, and Eleanor came along too. It was a big deal to move Franklin Roosevelt, He wanted to do a tour of the war plants, and the first stop was Detroit. And in one day, he went to the tank arsenal, and then they went out to Willow Run. And they rode around in the Sunshine Special convertible car. That's Mr. Keller, CEO of Chrysler, explaining the tank assembly process to them. And listen carefully. This is where they first appeared. That's at the tank arsenal railway platform. Typical picture, right, of President Roosevelt. He's always smiling, projecting this optimism. Of course, he's standing on steel, he's very stage managed. People asked about the black armband. His mother died just a few months earlier, and that's what that's about. I'm told back in those days, maybe for up to a year, people would wear a mourning band. So imagine you're working, it was top secret, they didn't tell the people they were coming until that morning, so you're working on the tank tread, and you look at, oh my God, that's Franklin Roosevelt. Rather surprising. These are some of the Tuskegee men at Selfridge. They gave me this nice picture, and to me, my caption is, these guys are ready to get out of the classroom and get their wings, and they did a very good job once they got into the fight. This is Willow Run at top production, twin mile long, amazing scale. Charles Lindbergh called it, when he first saw it, he was in awe. He said it's the Grand Canyon of the industrialized world. He worked there as a consultant for a while. Some Rosie pictures. These are, this is Willow Run. That's a little bit of a pose move, don't you think? Sort of a glamour shot. She's riveting. Here's another Rosie, less glamour. She's working on a plexiglass on a B-29. Let me just see. I got a couple more pictures here. Go back ahead. I have to show you the picture.
Right there.
Okay. Now
Focus.
it's blurry though. Oh, is it going to clear up? Oh, there we go. That's the Warren Tank Arsenal going at full blast. I just wanted to give a sense of the scale. This is one of my favorite pictures.
And that's all the swords. Yeah.
Yep. Willow Run, and that's Henry and Edsel with his back to us.
And Sorensen on the left.
Yeah. And they're typically Roosevelt's politicking and campaigning, and people are cheering him. I love this picture because Henry Ford is really miserable.
He didn't like
And
it.
he's sort of smiling.
Well, I call it Henry forces a smile. They had, when the president and the first lady arrived, Edsel had to send a search party out to find Henry. He was in the most remote part of the building. He didn't want any part of it. They practically dragged him to greet the president. Then they made Henry sit between Franklin and Eleanor. And they're big people, and he just started shrinking. And Sorensen later said he and Edsel were sitting in a jump seat across, and he said, the old man just glared at us and smiled the whole time. He was not happy. But Henry had to force a smile, for that picture. There's Albert Kahn, a master architect of the tank arsenal, Willow Run, Packard plant, you name it. That's at his Fisher Building office.
Yeah.
This is, again, the night of Pearl Harbor. It's out of order, but these are guardsmen putting up machine gun placement at the tunnel, the international border. And they were doing this for government buildings and war plants. And we were really nervous, that attacks and spies could happen. I look at this picture, I wonder, do these guys really know what they're doing? I'm not so sure.
One working and four watching.
They must have worked for the CCC before. This is a picture out of order here, but this is, they toured the tank arsenal, and then they went outside to the figure 8 test track and watched a bunch of the new tanks. This is September 18th, 1942. And the new M4 Sherman tank, much better than the M3. And they were going around spitting up dirt and going over puddles and showing what they could do. And they're enjoying it, right? What I find interesting about this picture, about a minute after it was taken, one of the brand new M4 Sherman tanks came barreling directly at the president and stopped either inches or feet short. And the Secret Service was not pleased at this demonstration of the braking system. I'm sure somebody lost their job. President Roosevelt just laughed it off. He was a cool customer. It's a good drive, my man. It's a good drive. But I've often wondered, what if President Roosevelt had been flattened in Detroit in September of 1942? History would have been different. A couple more. This is the race riot. This is a political cartoon. The Axis, Japanese and Germans, they used our race riots as their propaganda, showing, they would show pictures of burning cars. And, 34 people died over a couple of days in Detroit. People say to me, the Detroit race riot, and they're usually talking about 1967. I say, which one?
Yeah.
Because there's 43, and my colleague, there's one in 1863. Here's an ad for Telenews. At the end of the war, you can see, I don't think most people knew what the hell an atomic bomb was, but the general reaction was, thank God, and my husband's coming home. Palestine problem, some things never change.
Jeez.
People recognize this place?
Yeah. Sure do, John R. 6 Mile. Yeah.
The Rathskeller,
Chinese laundry. Yeah, so there.
it was going strong. They have these weekend sing-alongs, and I've discovered, it's sort of embarrassing, in the 30s, the big song at the end of the night was Deutschland über alles. And they decided to get rid of that, and they replaced it with God Bless America. And here's a trivia question for you. Raise your hand. Who made God Bless America, the biggest song ever?
Kate Smith.
Songbird of the South. She could really belt it out. A couple more. The Yankee Air Museum raised money to save part of the plant, and there's that wonderful image that my young people know. Race riot, that's down on Woodward. I could show you 100 pictures. It would really bother you.
Bonsdale now.
Mhm. Oh, this is this is a picture. A friend of mine is out in Hawaii. This is the USS Arizona Memorial, and he sent me this picture, and I included it. He gave me a couple of options, and one thing you can see, B.R. Marsh Jr. Ensign. That's Detroit's first official casualty of World War II. He was one of the 2,403 men who died as a result of the attack. And what's interesting, his family lived in Grosse Pointe. I don't know which one.
We have this letter.
Yeah.
And this woman came into the Historical Society and said, my father has carried this letter since Pearl Harbor.
Yeah.
He was best friends with Ben Marsh.
Oh my gosh.
And wait, this is goosebumps stuff. Ben Marsh wrote the letter like December 4th or 5th, mails it. Pearl Harbor his best friend gets it after Pearl Harbor. He's just in tears. It's the dear. So we have the original letter. It's amazing. And you know.
Wow.
So, but when you had that, I started looking like, I wonder if he's on there. I'm sure he's
And I
on
wanted
there.
the name. I wanted his name embedded just to see how many. It's a sea of names.
Yeah.
Who's been to Pearl Harbor? I've not yet been. There's still oil leaking, and it's a pretty powerful thing.
The Motor City Brass Band, and some of the members live in Grosse Pointe, is playing at the anniversary in December.
At Pearl Harbor.
At Pearl
At Pearl
Harbor.
Harbor.
Everywhere I go, somebody comes out with a story like that. It's unbelievable. Here's some housing out by Willow Run. That's a two-family duplex out by Ypsilanti.
Duplex, yeah.
World's largest flag. That's the Hudson's building. And I believe them when they say it was the world's largest. Let's see.
That's the last one.
I think that's it.
That's it.
Oh, there was one. I got to show you one of a bar. Just hang on 1 second. It's probably my favorite book picture of all, and I'm sorry they're out of order. But for some reason, drinking is interesting to me as a patriotic act.
What is that? Go back.
Yeah,
just
let
a
me go
second.
back. These are.
That was the one you missed. that we
I'll go
started
back to a
talking
couple. This is a big. These are guardsmen. They had to bring in 6,000 guardsmen in the middle of the war to restore order in Detroit.
And then one back.
Yeah, I will. Right here.
Thank you. There we go.
That is a picture I discovered. That's at Lasher and Outer Drive.
Oh, yeah, okay.
In the median, in the Brightmoor neighborhood. And I discovered, the community raised money and dedicated that in 1943. And you can see the branches of service. And I took that back in August, in the median. And I guess it looks okay, right? The grass is
Grass wasn't cut, yeah.
flag is flying. But my caption says, thousands of people speed by that thing every day and never even look at it. And so if my book can get people, particularly young people, to look around, I'd be happy about that. I mean, there's one other. I got to find one in the bar. Yeah, have you seen that before? What's that?
The one with the hats?
Yeah, exactly.
That's so cool.
Yeah, could be my favorite one of all. It's in the book. They put a hat up for every guy in the service.
You can't leave without buying one tonight.
Let's see. I guess it's in the book. There it is. Okay.
There it is.
The Kenwood. I'll end with this. The Kenwood Bar on Lower East Side of Detroit. They put a hat up, a fedora for every neighborhood guy in the service. And I'm not quite sure what they did if the guy was killed or wounded, but this captures something very powerful to me.
Where is this located?
I don't quite know. It's on the east side, and if you can find out, it's called the Kenwood Bar. It no longer exists. So if you can, I'll appoint you as my research assistant.
Well, that's Joel Stone at the Detroit Historical Society.
Right. Well, I asked him yesterday, and he didn't know. So,
Okay, never mind.
and if anybody would know, he would know. So I think I've gone over time.
No, you're
actually. I
fine.
could do some readings, but
You enjoyed it? Questions at all?
questions? Yes.
Do you know anything about Schwaben Park?
Say again.
Do you know anything about Schwaben Park?
Schwaben Park. Is that a German park? I don't really.
The park was located just in back of where the LA Fitness is on Old 8 Line.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
And when I was a kid, my mother used to say, Billy, don't go anywhere near there, it's a Nazi wound.
Yeah, well, who knows what was going on in there, and German and Italians were looked on with great suspicion, actually. Any other comments? I'm
Any
still blown
questions?
away by what we have.
And I'll tell you that it's on our newsletter on our website.
Wow.
We did an article.
On the Grosse Pointe.
Historical Society
Okay,
website.
I'll look for that. Fantastic.
Yes.
How do you address the women's issue after all these?
Oh, they lost their jobs.
The men came back and they got pushed out of the job.
Cut and dry.
The Wall Street Journal did a survey of the Rosies in 1945, and 75% said we would like to keep our jobs, but they didn't get to keep them. So, and suddenly the message shifted from, if you look at women's magazines and advertisements during the war, short hair, Veronica Lake cuts her hair, dames in slacks, it's all about work. If you look at the ads in 1946, it's women with aprons back in the kitchen doing long recipes. But Rosie mostly lost her job, and that's just the way it was, But I think these women remembered the good pay, the lieutenants they had, and I think they wanted something for their daughters. It's sort of sad, that they lost their jobs. But probably a third of the workforce, certainly in Willow Run, was women. And first they did little precision jobs, and then they did heavy work. So, no Rosie, no win, no victory. There's no question about that. Any other comments?
I worked at the Rouge in 1974 after I got a C in organic chemistry and dropped out pretty bad. But I believe there were women still working there that had been there since World War II.
Wow.
They had like 35 years with Ford, and I'm like, wow.
What kind of stuff were they doing? Do you know?
In the stamping plant, they were mainly secretarial, but the couple of them were in their 60s, which seemed old then. And they told me they'd been there since World War II. Yeah.
Well, you guys have moxie. Okay.
Thank you so much.